Welcome back to B Master 79. In this lesson we are taking on ielts speaking part 2 and part 3. Topic 51. Describe a person who you think wears unusual clothes. We will plan the card together, hear a full band 9 model long turn, and then work through all 4 part 3 questions. 2 honest notes before we start. First, the Band 9 label is our own assessment written against the public ielts band descriptors. It is not a certified examiner score. Second, our candidate, Trang, is invented, and so is everything she describes. Copy her technique and her language. Do not copy her story. Here is what part 2 actually looks like. The examiner hands you a card, gives you 1 minute to prepare, and you then speak for 1 to 2 minutes. The examiner will not interrupt you. If you stop at 40 seconds, you have simply thrown away half of your marks. This is the card, printed exactly as it appears in the original source. Read it with me. Notice bullet 2, it says how you knew this person in the past tense. Most official cards use the present. Answer it in whichever tense fits your story. The examiner is marking your English, not the printing. Now the planning minute. Most candidates waste it writing sentences. You cannot read a sentence aloud and still sound spontaneous. Write keywords instead, 1 per bullet, and give the final bullet the most thought because that is where the strongest answers pull ahead. Here are the notes Trang produced in her 60 seconds. 4 keywords plus a short list of vocabulary she wanted to use. That is all. Notice how concrete the third line is. Specific detail is what makes a description memorable. Let us hear the answer, 1 section at a time. First, who this person is and how Trang got to know her.
The person who springs to mind straight away is a woman called MS Han, who runs a little second-hand bookshop about 10 minutes from my flats. I got to know her purely by accident. I wandered in one rainy afternoon looking for a novel I couldn't find anywhere else, and we ended up chatting for the best part of an hour. Since then, I've dropped in almost every fortnight, so what began as a customer relationship has slowly turned into a genuine friendship.
Next, the clothes themselves. Listen for the pile-up of precise detail and for adjectives that do real work.
As for what she wears, I describe her style as gloriously eccentric. On any given day, she might turn up in a floor-length velvet coat in emerald green, layered over a hand-embroidered owl dye, with a pair of battered leather boots and half a dozen silver bangles that jangle whenever she reaches for a book. She also has an enormous collection of vintage brooches, little enamel beetles and dragonflies, which she pins on completely at random. Nothing she owns seems to match, and yet somehow the whole thing hangs together.
Now the most important part of the card, why the clothes are unusual. Notice that she answers by comparison, not by simply repeating the word unusual.
The reason her clothes strike me as so unusual is that they run completely counter to what people her age tend to wear where they live. Most women in their 60s go for something fairly understated, muted colours, simple cuts, nothing that draws attention. Han does the exact opposite. She treats getting dressed as a form of self-expression rather than a way of blending in. What's more, almost everything she owns is secondhand, so her outfits carry a kind of history that you simply can't buy off the peg.
And finally, a short reflective close, which gives the examiner a clean ending rather than a sentence that trails away.
I find it quietly inspiring, to be honest. There's something admirable about somebody who is completely unbothered by other people's opinions, and I always come away thinking I ought to be braver with my own wardrobe. So, yes, easily the most unusually dressed person I know, and by far the most memorable.
Here is the first half of the long turn in full, so you can read and listen at the same time. Pause the video if you want longer with it. And the second half. The whole answer runs to 315 words. The measured speaking time is printed on screen. Notice that it sits right at the top of the 2-minute window, and that is exactly where you want to be. That is part 2 finished. Part 3 is a different task altogether. The questions become abstract, the examiner will push back, and personal stories are no longer enough. You need an opinion, a reason, an example, and then a qualification. Question 1. Before you hear the answer, here is the shape of it. Here is Trang's answer.
Absolutely, and I suspect the effect is stronger than most people realize. Psychologists talk about enclothed cognition, the idea that clothing carries symbolic meaning, which then rubs off on the person wearing it. On a purely personal level, if I'm working from home in a tracksuit, I find it much harder to concentrate, whereas the moment I put on a proper shirt, something in my head switches into work modes. That said, it cuts both ways. An outfit you feel self-conscious and can undermine your confidence for an entire evening. So clothing isn't merely decorative, it works as a quiet psychological cue.
Question 2. Again, the plan first. And her answer.
It depends enormously on what you're buying. For basics, socks, plain, t-shirts, anything where you already know your size, online shopping is hard to beat. It's cheaper. The choice is vastly wider, and you're not trailing round a shopping centre on a Saturday afternoon. Where it falls down is with anything structured like a suit or a winter coat, because sizing is wildly inconsistent between brands, and you simply can't tell how a fabric will hang from a photograph. There's an environmental side too. Return rates are enormous, and a great deal of returned stock ends up in landfill. So I'd say it's sensible for the predictable things and risky for everything else.
Question 3. Watch how this one is framed as a change over time. Listen for the contrast between two sectors.
That's changed dramatically over the last decade or so. Traditionally, you'd expect fairly rigid formal wear, suits and ties for men, tailored trouser suits for women, and in sectors like banking, law, or government, that's still very much the norm. because the clothing signals authority and reliability to clients. But in the creative industries and in tech, dress codes have relaxed to the point of being almost non-existent. Jeans and trainers are completely acceptable, and in some places dressing formally would actually look out of place. The shift to remote working accelerated all of that. Once people had spent a year on video calls, a lot of companies quietly stopped enforcing the old rules altogether.
And question 4. Notice the twist at the end of the plan. And the final answer.
The clearest difference is priority. Younger people tend to dress for identity, whereas older people generally dress for comfort and practicality. Teenagers and people in their 20s follow trends quite closely. They'll happily wear something impractical because it signals which group they belong to, while older generations lean towards durable fabrics, looser cuts, and colors that won't date. Having said that, I think the gap is narrowing. My parents' generation are far more fashion conscious than my grandparents ever were, and social media has exposed everybody to the same trends regardless of age. So the boundary is a good deal blurrier than it used to be.
Let us collect the language. These 6 come from the long turn. Learn them as whole phrases, not as single words. And 6 more from part 3. The last 2 are discourse markers. They cost you nothing to learn, and they hold a long answer together. So why would we call this band 9? Here is the reasoning, criterion by criterion. And once more, this is our judgment against the public descriptors, not a certified score. Your turn. 4 steps, and the second one is the one that matters. Record yourself. Nobody has ever improved their speaking by only reading model answers. If this helped, subscribe to Bmaster79 and we will see you in the next lesson.